Or maybe it just comes down to there's more of an appetite for these cybersecurity talks to, both technical and non-technical folks. So at some point, I'll probably pick on the audience here just to figure out where everybody's kind of coming in from, and what you do, whether you're a vendor or a consultant or in industry, and then maybe what your title is. And I'll certainly share my spiel as well. But before I tell you kind of too much about me, I could kind of maybe sum it up with a quick video. So I'm going to hope that the audio comes through on this. But, I do, like I say, give a lot of these talks. I give a lot of them to the news as well. So anytime we see something happening with, worldly events in cybercrime, or, policies in cybersecurity are changing, I tend to get phone calls from NBC10, and I jump on and do some sound bite for them for their, article. This little blurb is kind of just more background about me, kind of where I find my sweet spot in cybersecurity. So again, we're going to hope the audio comes through here. Let me know if it doesn't. You guys hear that okay?
No audio.
Just before 9:15.
No audio.
There's something.
Plotted a break-in. Hunting for medical records and personal data of thousands of Philadelphians. In less than 4 seconds, they were in. But they're not the bad guys. You break and enter for a living. That's right. As cyber criminals target more Americans every day, from mega companies to individual social security numbers, businesses across the country are turning to professionals like Matt Barnett, hired to test both their cyber and physical data security.
How do we know that the doors are locked properly and that the sensors are operating the way they should?
NBC10 got exclusive access to see exactly how Barnett does it. The target? The Mazzoni Center in Philadelphia, a health and wellness clinic that services tens of thousands of the city's LGBTQ community.
We have their protected health information. We have their demographics, all the key info that comes in. We have to make sure we keep it secure.
The center's Sharon Chaco believes it's secure, but
we don't know the vulnerabilities unless someone breaks in.
So he's paying for a break-in. For days, Barnett and his team surveyed the place, recording the clinic, identifying weak points, preparing for this October night. And with the police aware, just in case, Barnett geared up. All the tools you'd expect, and some you wouldn't. You could have the best antiviral software in the world, but if you can get inside the system and put this in,
right,
then you're in.
Exactly.
So just before 9:15, body cameras on, the two were hauling. We followed along across the street. In an instant, they were in.
Yeah,
The first bit of good news for the company, the alarm went off as soon as Barnett reached the door. But as Sharon watched on the center security cameras, he was stunned.
And I'm like, all right, there's no way they're not going to go in that door. Okay, they're in that door. No way they're going to make it in the elevator. They're at the elevator.
Floor by floor, Barnett slipped by locked doors, broke into secure areas, and even got his hands on historic medical records. Thankfully, the security largely held up. The all-important data center went undiscovered.
Sometimes it's the most secure building that you get into the easiest, and sometimes it's the one you expect it to be easy ends up being the real challenge. And I think this case had a great balance, and that's really a win-win for everybody.
For the center security team, the experience was reassuring.
We have to make sure that we're always prepared for something bad, because the truth of the matter is the world is crazy and people are always looking to get away with something.
The clinic is now reinforcing doors and procedures, and Sharon's convinced other companies should test their systems too.
It's always good to stay ahead of the curve and see what you're facing against, rather than waking up one morning and then you have everything that you've built so far in jeopardy.
Even if it means letting the good guys break in to keep the bad guys out. The investigators, Danny Freeman, NBC 10 News.
Lessons learned.
So hopefully that audio came through okay, and then this slide then tends to make a lot more sense, right? There's a lot of people that see my intro slide and go, well, that's not really cybersecurity, and the truth is that's true. I tend to break into buildings to get access to physical security more often than not, because what we're largely finding in 2022 is that perimeter security is holding up in a lot of ways that it never used to. And so sometimes the weakest point of an organization is to actually get into the building, be able to plug into the network jacks, or, you know, pick locks and get into the data center and that type of stuff. So so more often than not, my days are spent with either at my chiropractor trying to fix, you know, bad neck issues, or you know, trying to do some sort of you know, stretching. But you know, that's me. I tend to not be too heavy on the text on slides, so that's why you probably won't see a ton there. But the one thing I kind of do want to, you know, give just a little bit of an overview about what we're going to talk about. So I do want to kind of figure out who you guys are, you know, where you're coming in from. Like I said, I'll just kind of randomly call people, you know, go through the list. But just if you could, just a quick little 30-second blurb. Hey, I'm this person. This is what I do, and this is, you know, where I work. That would be great. And that way I can kind of make sure that I'm staying relevant. After that, we'll talk about the, you know, 30,000-foot view of security today, right? So how we're approaching security with our customers, how, if you have customers or if you have key stakeholders in your organization, we'll call those internal customers, you know, how you're going to approach security with them, and maybe some things that you should be asking. After that, we'll go with, you know, the all present, never going away ransomware, which still, you know, still tops the charts as our #1 threat. And then, you know, we'll offer some advice on what we're doing to help our customers. And then I'll certainly have enough time for Q&A. Hour and a half, I think, is more than enough time to get through all of this. So hopefully, you know, we'll get through it pretty quickly and have a good discussion at the end. If anybody has any questions, comments, you know, wants to chime in, you know, I tend to treat these more of an open dialogue and an interactive session rather than just me sitting up here talking for an hour and a half. As Mike might tell you, that's a long time to listen to Matt ramble. So without further ado, I guess we will just start with you, Carol. Where are you coming in from?
Yeah, I'm coming in from Basking Ridge, New Jersey, which is north central New Jersey. And I'm a job seeker looking for my next president or COO role in the diversified industrial sector. So given that kind of role, I'm interested in just about knowing something about everything. So that's why I'm here today.
Some great. Well, welcome. How about Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim Harp from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I am transitioning from my last role where I was Director of Armaments at the U.S. Mission in NATO for 8 years. In that role, I had all the cyber, trying to get the 28 nations cyber security levels up to the U.S. standards or higher. So I had a lot of input with cyber there. And prior to that, I was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, where we in charge of buying all the cyber systems and all the cyber protocols with the NSA and DoD.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm sure you've got stories.
Lots of stories.
Taylor.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Good.
Yeah, Taylor Fernley, live west of Philadelphia, live in a town called Gladwin. Spent most of my career in the association management world, putting on conventions and trade shows for trade associations and professional societies. I have started a new company. We are referral partners. I work with business owners who want to leverage my relationships with people who I know to generate new business. So I'll sit down with them, find out who they want to get in front of. I go out in my network, find out who would be a good match, pre-qualify and bring them back to the table and take it from there. So
Great.
never thought I'd be doing this time of my life, but can't play golf every day.
That's true. That's true. I have a 30-second cap for everybody but Mike, in which case I reduce it to a 3-second cap because he is perpetually overachiever. So Mike.
I know some of you from my previous time at Beacon, and Taylor and I actually were in a networking group together. My name's Mike McEwen. I've just come on board with the 7X team after spending 7 years with BTB Security, selling all the services that Matt and company do. Matt and his partner Ryan Bradbury brought me on because they were at BTB with me. So I think I'm stepping into an awesome situation where this company really has the track record that I was bringing to my customers previously at BTB. So looking forward to hearing what everybody's got to say today, and do some of the Q&A with you. One of the things that I also bring to the table, besides the security background from a business development standpoint, is I'm a jobs guy. 20 plus years doing something related to jobs. So I'm happy to look at resumes and open my network up to folks that are in transition. Feel free to reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. So
awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
And we're excited to have you as well, just in case that went unsaid. Megan.
You know what, folks? It's great. It's great working for younger people. They actually do respect their elders. It's awesome.
All except for Mike.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Megan Zug. I am a CPA, typically working with small but typically complex organizations, director, CFO type capacity. And I tell you, I always love cybersecurity topics because we're hot targets for phishing and all that kind of stuff. And I really like the physical intro because sometimes it's just like keep it simple, like how do you open the mail and stuff like that. So looking to learn something today. Thanks.
Definitely, yeah. Hopefully we get you some. Everybody but Tim is probably going to learn something today. Maria.
Maria Bommersbach from Prince Transformations, and I'm a process reengineering and change management consultant. I have my own firm. And what I do is I'll go into a mid to large size company and I'll look at their people, process, and technology, bring it all together if they have a change or if they just want to make it continuously improved and have them have success. So the reason I'm here today, and I'm very interested, is because I do deal with the technology piece in each of my clients.
Awesome. Yeah, hopefully we'll get you something to talk about. Georgine.
I'm going to do one quick interrupt on with what Maria said.
Yeah.
From a business perspective, the mid-market is underserved in terms of security services. So Maria, I think you're reaching on that one, and that's one of the areas that we have focused on. Is the big guys are all doing a bunch of stuff, but I think the big impact is impact opportunity for us is mid-market because it's not been served well by the technology security community.
Good point. Georgine.
Hi, Georgine Wardzinski. I have my own firm, Star Business Alliance. I deal in change, specifically along M&A for small companies under 20 million. But my corporate background was in property casualty insurance, for a lot of commercial, a lot of complex commercial, and insurance is data. So I'm big on the whole cyber, and I do find with my smaller clients that this isn't even something on their radar. And so when you're going through a transaction and I come in and say, we have to keep this data, it's just amazing, the lack of understanding. And then last year, not professionally, but personally, I got hacked. And it was ugly. And many of the Beacon people know because they got an email from me in October of 20, this was 2020, not 21. But so I have a whole different perspective from there. And it's not the if, it's the when. And we all have to be aware of cybersecurity. So.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about the insurance, right? We are seeing some things kind of change. It used to be anybody could go get a cyber insurance policy for a couple of bucks and it was fine. And now, because I imagine because some of these people have, for lack of a more politically correct term, lost their butts on paying out claims. They're actually starting to take a pretty processized view of writing these policies to make sure that they're not just insuring somebody that the when is a certainty. So no, it's a great point, and we'll certainly touch on that in a little bit. Jody.
Hi, hi, Jody Trenzi. I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, and long-term GPSEG member and Beacon member. And my background has really been in development, business development, and I'm in the process of being hired by a global company with these that's going to be selling or does sell these types of products. So I'm on a very steep learning curve. So that's why I jumped on this call, because I'm going to be really entrenched and really immersed in this, and I want to learn as much as I can. So that's my reason or impetus for joining this morning.
Okay, awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and my goal, right? I mean, based on the audience that did I forget anybody? Is there anybody that I didn't call on or pick on, as the case may be?
This is Frank. I'll just echo Megan's comments. I'm a CPA. I prepare taxes for individuals and corporations, and so always dealing with other people's sensitive data, and so protecting that both physically and electronically is just it's what we're required to do. But it's always always a concern.
I mean, you see this a lot, right? Especially in the really small businesses. I mean, my CPA for the last decade and a half has been, out of a very small office, with a residential grade front door and, a filing cabinet that, doesn't have a lock on it because she got it from Facebook Marketplace. It's kind of the same story across the country, that we have these very small businesses. And to Mike's point, they've been underserved from the cybersecurity and even the physical security spot. There's a lot of, you can go to the Protection Bureau or Sloman Shield or, insert, physical security vendor here, but which one of those vendors is going to come out and actually test your security? If you really wanted physical security tested, who do you call? And it's not intuitive to think to call a cybersecurity company, but we, as far as I know, are the only types of people out there that are testing the physical aspect of of security for anybody. So I'm sure the military has a slightly different approach to that, as Tim, I'm sure, has dealt with, but and in the public sector in general. But from the private side, yeah, it's huge. So I can certainly appreciate that, and I will definitely tailor this more towards kind of keeping those small to mid-sized businesses in mind, and hopefully giving a few people that are looking for their next role some talking points, and some people that are in transactions with customers, giving those some talking points as well. So great to meet everybody. Like I said, feel free to jump in and pick on me or pick on Mike if you have time. The comment section is great for that. So security at a 30,000 foot view, right? One of the things that we talk about are these critical threat actors. So where are our threats coming from? I mean, especially in the smaller to mid-sized businesses, we have, the ransomware threat actors are largely not domestic. They are, Russian, Nigerian, and to, believe it or not, a lesser extent, Chinese, right? Do see a lot from India as well. But here's the interesting thing. Ever since these sanctions have started to roll out with this war with the Ukraine, we've actually seen a drop in ransomware from Russia. And Russia by far is the largest purveyor of ransomware. They are the authors, they are the deployers. And if you've ever heard the term blank as a service, right? Infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platforms as a service, yada, yada, email as a service, yada, yada, yada. There is actually something called ransomware as a service, where these people for a couple $100 can go out and buy a kit that allows them to deploy ransomware. And it comes with tech support, and it comes with an email to get them to help you out and to build custom phishing campaigns. And it's pretty wild what you can do just as a very business to business transactional type of deal with these, kind of Russian crime syndicates. So we've seen a downtick in that for probably the first time in, since the dawn of ransomware, truthfully. But that is, that's kind of the assessment profile. Most of the attackers are not US based for a lot of reasons, but the very, very sophisticated attacks are coming in from, kind of the big players that you would expect them to be coming from. So so what does that do, right? That creates a lot of fear among our customers, right? What are they afraid of? Well, largely it's the unknown, because you never know how you're going to be able to respond to an attack that you don't know how devastating it is, right? You don't know if your backups are intact until you have to use them. You don't know if your people have been hacked for months, right? I think Varonis or Verizon, one of those big data breach reports, and I would encourage you to go look at that if you ever have some time. Just Google Verizon data breach report and you'll find it. It's a free document. Verizon kind of aggregates a lot of data and they put it out there, and they'll give you stats and percentages. So if you're ever looking for stats to back up, all the stuff you make up for slides at 9 o'clock in the morning, then that's where you go. But one of the things that they talk about is how these attackers stay dormant for such a long time, and the median compromise time is upwards of 180 days, I believe. So that's a long time for somebody to sit and lay in wait in your environment or in a customer environment before they make their presence known. And a lot of times what that does is it allows them to understand the normal processes, understand how accounts payable interacts with its customers, and how, what accounting systems are being used, what, the typical email interdepartmental communications look like. So when they launch their attacks, they tend to get very good success rate because they understand the environment. And you contrast that to something called penetration testing, which is what our firm does, where we pretend to be the bad guys and we hack into the company. And a lot of times when we're talking to IT folks and we say, hey, we're going to pretend to be the bad guy, we're going to break into your company, what do you want from us? What's a successful project look like to you? And we hear it all the time. Get domain admin in our environment, right? Get complete control of our Windows environment. And honestly, there's very few attackers that are going out there and doing that, because having admin control in most environments doesn't do a whole lot. If you're a CPA, right, or you're a bank, being an admin at a bank doesn't really help you move money. It doesn't help you get access to client records. Sure, it can short circuit copying large chunks of data out of the environment, but to really just get in there and read and transact normal business or hijack email, you don't need admin access. And so a lot of times these real threat actors are staying away from, the admin accounts because they're so heavily monitored, and it's easy to pick up on attacks against an admin account. It's much harder to pick up on a bank teller's account, and that's really all you need. So, your normal user account that you're doing tax returns with on your desktop is really just as, important.
You ready to roll? Get that thing back in the garage.
Let's do, there we go. Perfect. Thanks, Wendy. All right. So, so that's really what we're kind of seeing here with this, lost my mouse. There she is. With our most common threat vectors, right? We're seeing a lot coming in through email. We're seeing a lot coming in through what we call drive-by downloads. And we're seeing a little bit less of that. And for anybody that doesn't know, a drive-by download is basically when an attacker takes over a legitimate website and uses it to host malware or host some other, nefarious worm or other type of bad software. You visit the website, it prompts you to do something, you think, oh, this is fine, and then you click a button and all of a sudden it's game over. So I would caution you, anytime you see those certificate errors as you're just kind of normally browsing about, if the site is complaining or if Google is complaining and telling you something's not right, just walk away. It's easier to not have the problem than to risk it to read some article or to log into something that just kind of feels a little sketchy. So just kind of go with your gut there. But it also kind of goes to highlight that the types of attacks that companies are dealing with very much varies based on the size of the organization. And so what I mean by that is, if you think about what it takes to get into a large company, it's not much. If you said, hey, Matt, go get access to American Airlines, right? I could probably have an account and right, not boastful in any way, but just the odds are overwhelmingly against them that I could have some account in their environment by the end of day tomorrow. It's just, there's too many accounts. It's too big. Somebody's going to have a bad password. Somebody's using, with spring 2022 point as a password. It's just, it's a throw enough stuff against the wall, see what sticks type of problem. Conversely, you get down to the medium-sized businesses and you start to see it gets a little bit harder, right? Because there's not as many accounts. People tend to know other people. Your ability to impersonate is much harder, right? Somebody at American Airlines reporting to another, having a communication from somebody else in another department, that you may not know everybody you're talking to, is my point. So a lot of times those emails get acted on because it's just assumed that it's a legitimate email and you don't have, it's normal to not know people in certain cases. The mediums and the small businesses, everybody knows everybody, much smaller attack surface, generally don't have a lot of stuff hanging out there on the internet. So what we see in the small to mids is these very targeted phishing campaigns, very well researched, very, they're not sending, they're not sending 30 emails, they're sending one, and they're going after, a very, very direct method that's very relevant to the person they're targeting. They're doing tons of what we call open source intelligence, which is, what can I pick up from LinkedIn? I can see where you worked. I can see who your connections are. What about your Facebook? What are you selling on the marketplace? Where are you at geographically? Do you have kids? Are they on soccer teams, right? There's a whole lot of information just kind of floating out in the ether that these attackers are then taking and, filling out very crafted emails, hey, soccer update, right? Whatever the case may be. And it tends to be very successful. The other thing I want to mention real fast is, when you talk about small, medium, and large companies, we talk about a budget delta, right? And as Tim probably knows from the public sector, budget might not be an issue at government level entities, but it is certainly an issue at a single or two-person CPA firm. So, nobody's expecting you to deploy $100,000 security remote monitoring or a security information monitoring system, because it's just not in the budget and it's not in the capability stack of the people that work for the company to even administer it and get meaningful value out of it. So that's where, that's where we also see a technology delta between those types of organizations. And so that's why small and medium businesses have become more targeted, because they have less detective and preventative capabilities.
One comment I might throw in, Matt, that I think is important, especially for this organization as you advise your customers. The speed with which companies can be attacked with computers is very, very high. It's not like walking into a 7-Eleven and, trying to steal a tasty cake or something like that, and you're going to try to hit 50 7-Elevens to get 50 tasty cakes. In the time you walk in to steal one tasty cake, a computer system can probably steal, $100 million, from a bank, as an example, in terms of speed with which they work. If you're looking, as a criminal to shake a door and figure out whether you can break in that door or not, with a computer, in the time that you go to shake that door, that computer can solicit, hundreds of thousands of IP addresses and shake them up to see if there's a weak link, right? So this idea of, I always like to, think out loud about, everybody can be broken into. You want to try to make it a little bit harder than the next guy. So again, somebody that's trying to steal a car walking down the street, he or she's looking for the car that's unlocked and doesn't have an alarm system on it. Especially in the small and medium marketplace, where systems are traditionally weaker than what is done in the larger organizations, this is a counsel to your customers in terms of, you should do some smart fortifying of what you've got, make it a little more difficult for people to enter in. And especially with the weakest link being humans, make sure your human assets are security aware. So anyway, sorry, Matt.
That's okay. Now I'm craving a tasty cake, but all right, I'll forgive you.
All right.
Yeah, and it's well said, Mike. The reality is that things move a lot faster at the ones and zeros level than they do at the speed of the shoe leather express. And so when I get into an organization, I can dump data extremely fast. Ransomware has been engineered to be exceedingly fast. And we'll talk about the evolution of ransomware and where that has gone and why it's now more impactful and more potent than it used to be. But the reality is computers, they don't get tired, they don't take a break, they don't complain, they don't need a lunch, they don't, they just keep going. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of these attacks get triggered in the overnight hours when the humans are tired, when our internal defenses are down. That's when these things tend to go, because they they can go and get all this stuff very quickly and do it undetected, and by the time you wake up the next morning, you're in you're in some hot water. So here is our list of the top 5, and maybe there's a bonus in there, but the ransomware still peaks the charts as the #1 risk to the organizations, and that's because it has evolved. In the old days, ransomware was it's the throw enough stuff to the wall, something will stick, I'll get paid, right? I will encrypt somebody's data that'll pay me, and it'll make the whole thing worth it. If I bought the kit for $300 and I sprayed it against 1,000 people and one person paid me $500, I made 200. And to Mike's point about it doesn't matter, if I'm doing it for one person, I can do it for 1,000 people. How hard is it for me to go get an email list out there? I can buy them from any lead gen company, right? Hey, give me every CFO in the country. Well, I can do that with a free trial of Zoom Info. So getting lists of people for targets is trivial. And sending one email is the same as sending a million. So that was the old school. Let's throw it out there, let's see what happens. If it triggers on somebody, great. Now, right, spam filters have gotten better. Even our personal emails, our Googles, our Yahoos, our Comcasts, they're good at filtering a lot of this stuff, and they do protect us from the attachments that are particularly malicious. So sometimes that actually makes it hard for me as a legitimate bad guy, if that makes any sense. It's hard for me to even get tools that I want, right? I can't go out and download some of these security tools because Chrome is telling me, oh, this is a hacking tool. Yeah, I know, I'm a hacker, I want it. But that same protection is coming to the end users, which I think is great. But when it does hit, it's becoming much more impactful. And like I said, I'll save some of that for a little bit. But the next one that's really big is phishing. That's going to stay pretty high. The reason that phishing stays high on the charts and tops it year after year is because the firewalls do what the firewalls do, right? They don't get tired, they don't go to sleep, they don't take a break, they don't need a union, they just work. And people, right, are the weak point in security now, and they have been for a long time. So when I do these penetration tests and I'm trying to break into a company, it's very rare that I find a technical vulnerability, some unpatched firewall or some exposed, legacy service that I can steal, and it's not the hacking, in the closet with the dark lights off type of thing that everybody kind of has that mental picture of. It really is, let me send something plausible to one person and get access to their email, right? Which leads us to the next thing. Business email compromise is huge, because getting access to somebody's email doesn't just let you troll their email for information. It lets you be credible to other people. I'm sorry, there were a lot of introductions, but I think it might have been Megan who talked about having personal hack, in the introductions where some members from this group were targeted because of, that compromise to her inbox. So maybe it wasn't Megan, maybe it was somebody else. Yeah, somebody else. Okay, got it.
Georgian. That was Georgian.
Georgina, yeah, okay, gotcha. So sorry, I guessed wrong. But at the end of the day, having access to somebody else's email allows you to assume all the credibility that they've built with everybody else. So if I email Mike right now, he's much more likely to fall for it because it came from a trusted source, right? It was my legitimate email. It was my, is everything real about it was through the credibility that I've earned. So that's why compromising even marketing people and sales folks, that's huge because the sales guy, right? Mike doesn't have access to our accounting software, but he has access to send me an email as Mike. So, we get this trust that comes from compromising that. So that's why business email compromise is still big. Plus, how do we interact with all of our vendors? How are we submitting job resumes? How are we talking to, our folks? It's through email. So you start to get into some of those processes and start to manipulate an accounts payable, right? What if I just went to, let's say and I've had this, this is a real situation, excuse me. We had a customer where they were doing construction, big giant construction project. They, the company came out, they hung their signs out front like, hey, we're doing this, big renovation, building you this new building. Great. Well, somebody drove down the road, got into some email, sent an email to our client and said, hey, just letting you know, we're migrating to a new bank and here's our updated payment information. That's it. No ask for money, no ask for, an advance, nothing like that. And that was it. The person went in, updated the ACH information. And then when that construction company sent them their next invoice, well, it just got paid. But where did it get paid to? The updated ACH information. Do you think that got noticed at first? It didn't, right? It didn't get noticed until they were 30 days late. But by the time they were 30 days late, they'd already paid a second invoice. So there were two, possibly three invoices that got paid to the wrong ACH information before anybody even caught this. So that's why, it's such a big deal to make sure our emails are well secured, that we know when bad things are happening. As a person, just occasionally scroll through your sent messages. Look who you've sent messages to and see if there's something that sticks out at you. Did you send an email to this other person? Because if somebody gets access to your email and sends 50 emails and then logs right out, unless you get a reply from them, or unless you go back and look at your sent messages, you may not see that. So you could be compromised for long before you actually know it.
And often I found they'll set up like auto forwarding and stuff too, and delete, some of the stuff. So, it really, for us, I really found that it's creating like what's normal, right? Whether it's sharing stuff in email or not.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's where this, 180-day mean time to compromise or detection is. It comes from the lying in wait, just reading emails, right? I may watch a person's inbox for a month before I do anything with it, because when I finally do push the button, I need it to work. I need it to look like and feel like, otherwise my entire month has been wasted. So no, it's a great point. And that's big too, right? Go in, if you're checking your sent box, look at your rules that you have set up. Has somebody said, hey, duplicate all my emails to this external, email address? A lot of times we'll recommend our customers actually disable automatic forwarding to external domains. It's a big, data exfiltration method too. And, we can't get out of this world without talking about the insider threats. And that is, we've talked about how good firewalls are, and maybe we've done a lot of really good security awareness training. We've got this great spam filter, and we can't send a phishing email because it gets blocked. The users are smart enough to pick up on it, and we can't attack the firewall because it works the way it's supposed to. So what do? Well, we buy access, right? We call up the low-level guy or gal in the mailroom and we say, hey, you want to make $20,000? Sure, here, give me your credentials, right? Because what does that do? Well, right, it gets me a custodial account. It gets me credibility. It gets me access to the internal network. It gets me everything I need. And if I deploy a $50,000 ransomware, it cost me 20 for the creds, I'm still pocketing $30,000 and I didn't have to do any attacks at all. So we still have to keep an eye out for our insider threats, and we have to be mindful of where our users are logging in from and doing all that good stuff. And again, right, in smaller businesses, this is something that you can automate a lot of those checks and things like that. But as a small, maybe a 2-person, 3-person CPA shop, or as a smaller company, it's harder to get those types of controls put in place. So one thing you can do is just block access from places aren't legitimate, right? If you're using Office 365, you can set up what they call conditional access, which will prevent you from being able to log in from other countries. And that kicks out, right, the rest of the world as an attack surface. You can bypass it, but it helps. And to Mike's point about, hey, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friend, right? If I'm in Nigeria and I'm just pounding away at user accounts and I can't log into this one, but I can log into another one, well, I'm taking the path of least resistance.
One thing I might want to bring up when you talk about that insider threat
oh God,
thing that's going on, a lot of the problems that we run into with our customers are not technical. It's process, procedure, control driven type of a thing. The situation that Matt described from a client standpoint, that was a lack of controls. Somebody made a change in a major vendor payment and there was no double check of it, right? Next thing you know, something happens along the way. We've seen a number of or gotten a number of what we would call forensic requests, terminated employee, and somebody is suspicious that they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing, where we end up after the fact trying to, reconnect on, or connect the dots, I should say, on, information taken from the company that has very little to do with the technology, has a whole lot to do with process and controls. And again, when you look at smaller organizations, the big companies are great about putting in process for the sake of process. In smaller organizations, I think sometimes you avoid process because you don't want it to slow you down. But in fact, I think it can be much more meaningful to your customers, that you all are working with. Remind them that there's some simple but impactful controls that you can put in place, meaningful processes to keep the ball rolling, but keep the ball rolling in a secure fashion.
Yeah. And the other thing that brings up is, when you're not just for your customers, but for your, business associates, or when you're doing B2B work, can you, what are you asking them as part of their vendor due diligence, right? Is there, are you asking about cyber? Are you asking about, some of these internal controls that they have, making sure that the people that you're interacting with as another business are not putting you at risk or your data at risk, especially if they have hooks into your environment. So, and we had a couple of, former cybersecurity insurance folks on the line. I'm sure that has changed too, because it used to be, hey, you want cyber insurance here, you can have it. Now, we're getting calls from customers that are saying, hey, our cyber insurance vendor wants this, this, and this before they'll underwrite a policy for us. So we have to go in and kind of audit some of these controls, or take a look at and be able to check some of these boxes to make sure that the company is insurable. And we actually have a big school that does great work, right? I mean, we test them and have been testing them for years and years, and they do such an amazing job, even with a small and understaffed IT firm. they are still having trouble getting insurance because they're a school, because just the nature of students and where they have to allow people to log in from and yada, yada, yada. It's very hard for them to get a fair price, even though they're doing a lot of things right. I mean, they can catch a student account being used by not the student in less than 12 hours and cut it off. And even if that account wasn't detected, that student account has no access to anything. So they do a great job and they're still having trouble. So that should highlight at least how difficult it is and why a lot of these things are so important to be able to not just have protection against, but be able to articulate that protection. So vishing is, if you've never heard the term, it's basically phishing over the phone. So it's voice phishing. I don't know who came up with the term. Spell check on every, Microsoft Word and PowerPoint tells me it's a wrong word, and but it knows phishing. So who knows? So vishing is kind of what we talked about. It's picking up the phone, calling somebody and talking them into or out of doing something. And the reason that this has gotten traction is because the spam filters and the, protection against email has gotten so good. Multi-factor authentication is a huge step to blocking these password guessing attacks. And multi-factor authentication, I'm sure everybody's heard the term, I'm sure everybody knows what it is, but in case there's one person that hasn't heard it, it's basically having some secondary form of validation that you are who you say you are before you are allowed to access a system. And a lot of times it has to be something that's different from something you know. So if your password is what you know, then the 6-digit code that comes to your phone is something you have, or it's your fingerprint, which is something you are. But a lot of people make the mistake that, oh, well, if I have a PIN and I have a password, well, that's multi-factor. And it's not, because it's two things that it's two things that could be guessed. It really has to be something you have, something plus something plus something you are, or some combination of those things. But with that type of control being applied to phishing, the recourse is to pick up the phone and call people, because the phone calls don't have the same multi-factor protection. What do we have there? We have callbacks. And very rarely does anybody do this, because one, it's rude, and two, I think people are just lazy in some cases. But if I pick up the phone and I call somebody and I say, hey, this is Matt from the IT department. We're doing a migration over to Office 365 and your email account is blocking the migration. We need you to go in and change your password temporarily. People are like, hey, well, they're not asking for my password. They're asking me to change it. And then I'll suggest to them, I'll say like, hey, one of the things that speeds it up and actually triggers the migration is if you set your password to migration 2022 ! With a capital M. And they'll be like, oh, great, thanks. And then they'll set their password. Having just told them what it is, I know what it is. So I go and log in. And now, what happens if there is multi-factor on their email? Hey, just out of curiosity, did a code pop up for you? Yeah, it did. Oh, great. Can you read that code to me? I just want to make sure that your token is synced correctly. Oh, yeah, it's 12785. Oh, perfect, thanks. Right. And then I'm in. So that is kind of the new way that we're getting around multi-factor authentication. It's the way that, in the presence of spam filters and all this other good stuff, that we're still able to get external access to a client environment. So just be aware of that. And I did hint at a bonus topic, and this is another one: empty offices, right? Especially in the wake of COVID. It was funny, one of the articles I read when COVID first set in, we were about a month or two in, and somebody had posted a picture of their office was infested with rattlesnakes out in Arizona because it had been left vacant, right? And so, the desert will do what the desert does. And, these snakes had gotten in because nobody was there. So as we kind of turn to working from home and we're leveraging, everything that's good and bad about that, we're kind of disregarding our physical on-prem, buildings. So we see this a lot on vacation time too. Martin Luther King, always a Monday. And so what do? We go in on Martin Luther King Day because nobody programs their badge access control, to account for the holiday. It's a Monday. And so the doors open at 8 a.m. and they lock at 5 p.m. and nobody's there because it's a holiday and we walk right in. So, just kind of as these empty offices tend to be more of the trend, and our infrastructure is sitting unmonitored from a physical standpoint, we have this new attack surface that comes by way of just easy or crime of opportunity, physical type access, which is also my favorite.
And Matt, just as a comment on this one, because I think we've seen an uptick from customers. When COVID hit, physical part of a penetration test that would be done kind of fell off the map.
Yeah.
We don't need to do it because nobody's in the office.
Yeah.
Right. When people were starting to come back into the office, now we're seeing that request that's happening. It's kind of like this, not everybody's there. They're not there all the time. And there's been a certain lax component of it because you just haven't had to be used to it. So I think there's been a lot of, if you will, proven exposure to this physical thing, and more testing it now is being requested, in that regard. And it's all pointing to, information technology was always the security scapegoat. And it keeps coming back to it's the human element and some, I'm going to call it common sense controls that have weakened, along the way. And the controls on the physical part, well, we're not worrying about our offices anymore because nobody's there. And the answer is exactly what Matt's been talking about. So we're seeing more testing of that. And it's a good, even if, you're not getting a firm like 7X to do that testing, I think that's a great recommendation for your customers, which is, go double check, what are the access points. Go make sure that people are not letting anybody in, kind of, piggyback, on the security badges and things along those lines. Just some, basic stuff. If you're not going to do a full test of that, that is something that you should be testing on your own.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier on this call, which is, the Sloman Shield guys in the Protection Bureau aren't doing this type of testing. So people, one, don't know that it's a thing. And the other people that aren't doing it are the big penetration testing companies, right? KPMG does not do physicals, right? Deloitte doesn't do physicals for all the red tape and bureaucracy that comes with it. And they may do it, but they're not going to do it the way that a true, and I don't mean to knock any other cyber firm, so please don't take it that way. But those types of companies do things in a very different way. And what we have found is that, the bigger firms that are engaged by the bigger companies, they want something done, right? Their idea of a physical is, hey, can our consultants just tailgate in during normal business hours? Nobody at KPMG is going in at 2:00 in the morning and trying to break in, by scaling the walls and coming in through the HVAC ventilation system, right? You've never seen it, and you never will. When they do penetration tests, a lot of them don't do phishing campaigns. And when they do a phishing campaign, they don't whitelist it. They don't take that extra step to get in because there is this kind of, it's like we want to know, but we don't want to know, right? So when you're a big organization, sometimes you don't necessarily want, you don't want the recommendation or the fallout from that. And it's kind of the problem with the checkbox penetration test is, yeah, you did it, you're compliant with the regulation that said you had to do it. But did you really get your money's worth? Did the firm really take that extra step to lay out all of your vulnerabilities in a way that a real attacker would do it? And that's what it comes down to, is true emulation versus simulation. So you could hire a company to come in and say they did it just for the sake of doing it, or you could hire a company to come in and really try to highlight the vulnerabilities. So I'll leave whichever one makes more sense to you up to you, but that's one other thing to take into account. there are very few companies that will do the level of physical testing that we will do. And that could, because it does have implications too. There are definitely security concerns. I've been arrested. I have had a gun pointed at me. I've been in some pretty precarious situations. Unfortunately, we're very safe about it now. We've got some good processes in place to make sure that authorities know before we do this. We don't want to put anybody in bad situations. And there's a line that I like. It's like, how'd you get good at this? Well, comes from experience. Good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of that comes from bad judgment. So we've learned a lot of lessons along the way. The industry as a whole has kind of evolved. There were a couple of penetration testers that were arrested in Iowa for doing this by breaking into a courthouse. Long story short, the state authorized them to do all this testing at local courthouses. One of the local courthouses kind of had a Barney Fife type of sheriff roll in and say, oh no, the state doesn't have jurisdiction to do this. You're trespassing on county property. You're going to jail, and ended up arresting these two very, very innocent testers for an entire weekend, and just not great. Changed a lot in our industry. A lot of times if I'm going to a state like Texas or Alaska or one of those places where it tends to be more of a shoot first, ask questions later type of state, better believe that I'm calling the local municipality and having a conversation with their law enforcement before we go in and do that. But again, right, nobody from KPMG is calling the police department saying, hey, we're about to break into a company. So just kind of understanding that there's very different modalities when it comes to doing physical security assessments. Okay, so with all of that said, right, how do we approach security? How do we approach it as a business of one? How do we approach it as a brand new team member, right? So all of our folks that are in transition, when you finally land at the next spot, and if security falls into your purview, how are you getting a lay of the land? Certainly, I'm sure, guys like Tim have a lot of experience on what questions to ask and what compliance needs to, account for, especially in the public sector, but there are some easy ways to have these conversations that will highlight exactly what you need to get. It's almost like, have you seen these tests where they're kind of dynamic tests, and they'll ask you a question, and based on how you respond, they kind of know whether you have a comprehension of a whole bucket of analysis, and they can skip to the next hardest one. And if you get that wrong, then they go back and try to bet. They're very dynamic in that way. Asking these types of questions will lead you down a path with the company to give you good insight into what they have or don't have. So a good question, what have you done so far, right? If the answer is nothing, then every question I'm about to list on this going forward is going to be zero. So if they say, well, we've done this, well, then you can kind of track down all right, you've done policy and procedure, but you don't have any actual documented evidence of that, and nobody's been taught the policy, and there's no program around it, blah, blah, blah. So that tells you, right, we have a material weakness. So one of the questions I love to ask is, especially for small companies, what have you done? Right? Do you have a spam filter for your email? Do you have, a firewall? Have you had any security assessments up to this point? Have you done a risk assessment? Have you done a vulnerability assessment? Have you done vulnerability scanning? Do you have patch management? There's a ton of different questions in this. What have you done so far? That can give you an indication as to, how the company is doing and what might be right for them to do to start or to continue on in the process.
As non-technical advisors to your clients, Matt went down a technical path of the patching and vulnerability scanning and everything like that. But I think that question from an open-ended perspective is a good one, at the highest level. Have you done anything policy, program, organization, control wise, which are all common business dialogues to have. So I think that question is one that helps you help your customer at the highest of levels when you think about it. And then, if they've got some good answers along the ways, then there's some opportunities to get technical. And that's where an organization like 7X may be helpful to where your customers may be going. So anyway, sorry, Matt.
Yep. So kind of along that line, right? If we abstract it from the technical back up to the strategic, right? That's when we start asking about the program itself. And do you have dedicated appointees to, is there an InfoSec manager? Is there a CISO, right? A dedicated role for, accounting for security at the highest level of the organization? Who does the CISO report to? Great question, right? Because if the CISO reports to the IT folks, that's bad. If it reports to, direct management, like a CEO, much better. Because what you don't want is IT trumping security and vice versa, right? You don't want security being able to tell IT. So there's got to be some accounting for making sure that our security program is reporting up the stack the right way. More strategic stuff, we're talking about policies and procedures, right? Asking a company for a list of their IT security policies is something we do fairly regularly because, again, if you have the maturity to have the policies and procedures laid out, more so the procedures than the policies, but we can start to see how mature the organization is. And I always like to bring up this effective security versus compliant security thing, which is we see a lot of companies check a lot of boxes and they look great on paper, right? But when you actually start digging in, you find that there are tons of, pathways and escalations and vulnerabilities and old out of date things because the assessment wasn't either done correctly or because it was very narrowly scoped to a particular subset of systems that look great, but attackers don't follow that. Attackers don't care about your scope. They don't care about leaving that one system alone that runs everything that's super critical. They don't care about that old, Windows XP machine. Don't touch that because it's doing a core business process. They're going to take whatever means is necessary. So when we look at effective security, we want to make sure that we're accounting for kind of a no blind spots approach. So that should make pretty good sense. Requirements, right? And this is, back to Tim's domain, how are we looking at, are we compliant? Are we PCI compliant? Are we ITAR compliant? Are we, I'm sure there are, GLBA and SOX and all those other, good frameworks that dictate things we have to do. Well, how are we aligning ourselves with those and how are we making sure that we stay compliant, et cetera? Do you have any breach notification teams and procedures? This is going to the incident response side where, hey, when bad things happen, who are you going to call, right? Truthfully, you can call me at 3 o'clock in the morning. I promise you I will answer the phone. I might be a little groggy. I might need coffee. I'm going to charge you a ton of money, but I'll answer the phone and I'll be there to bail you out. Much better to have an internal team to start that process, right? Having a good, well-formed line of communication. Who do I call? Who is going to be responsible for managing this incident? Having things like an incident response retainer firm where you're getting those hours ahead of time at a much cheaper rate, and you're guaranteed that those people and resources will be available, much better way to go. So it's kind of like they say, it's much better to have the plan in time of peace and use it in time of war than to try to write that policy and procedure on the fly. So that's just a good question to ask or a good thing to know about your organization is where that kind of stuff lives. And this is back to my first question about what have they done so far? What kind of testing have they done so far? What type of assessment work have they done? Do they have a penetration test you can look at? Do they have results from, a previous engagement that will give you some indication as to where they are? And then what have they done with that, right? Hey, we did this assessment. It came up with all these great findings. Where are the tickets that correspond to these? Where are the, where's the change management processes that remedy these? How do we look now relative to where we looked a year and a half ago when this assessment was done? And if we look exactly the same, well, there's a different problem there. So, so that's the gist there. And then we also have this kind of revised regularly versus set it and forget it. So are we writing these things, checking the box, and then moving on, and then they're out of date? Or are we going back and revisiting these policies, procedures, technical implementations on a regular basis to make sure that they're still relevant and protecting things? A lot of times, this is an interesting one, we end up saving people a lot of money in this regard because they pay for a service to protect a thing that they don't use anymore. Or conversely, they're out there with this new technology that has no protection around it. And they're, they believe that they have protection because they're paying for threat monitoring, whatever that might be, but they're threat monitoring the wrong infrastructure or the wrong, technology stack in the environment. So kind of keeping up to date with, making sure that your controls, your policies, your procedures, all that good stuff is aligned with what's actually in the environment is pretty important. All right. So anybody, and believe me, you don't have to go into any details, but has anybody been through ransomware before or had an active, had to be a part of one of these fun excursions?
Twice.
Mm-hmm.
It's
not
painful.
fun.
It's painful. Very painful.
Yeah, believe it. Yeah, so if you haven't been through ransomware, it is, even if you have good backups, it is one of the most frustrating, nerve-wracking experiences you can go through for a lot of reasons. And it goes back to the fear of the unknown that we talked about way earlier. Because when somebody's been in your environment, when encryption has happened, when you've been compromised, you have to get back to a clean slate where you are comfortable and confident that you are on safe footing to move forward, or you can't build a house on a cracked foundation. So making sure, right, and you'll drive yourself crazy going down the rabbit hole of, are they truly out? Is there some backdoor in some system, right? Do we have to go scorched earth and completely blow everything away? Like, these are the types of things where ransomware like kind of rears its ugly head. And like I said, the old school, nobody cared about the data. They cared about making your life, pardon my language, they just wanted to make your life a living hell till you paid some money and then it all went away. And that was the old school ransomware. But now we have this new school ransomware where, the answer to old school ransomware is have good backups. Have a good, known good set of data that you can restore to. You get ransomware, you wipe the encrypted files away, you put the good files back, and it's game over. You go back to your life. And attackers realize, oh, well, people aren't paying us because, they've got good backups. So how do we fix that? Well, the encrypt and pray thing is dead. Now we have this three-pronged approach. So we have the first thing they're going to do is they're going to get into your environment. That 180-day mean time to detection, they're laying in wait and they're exfiltrating your data. So slowly but surely, they're siphoning all those tax records off. They're taking all of that source code. They're taking all of that intellectual property and they're removing it from your environment, right? They're leaving a copy for you, obviously, but they're making their own copy. And if they're smart, they're doing this in a very low and slow approach so that you're not aware of it. Once they have a good, meaningful set of data, then they're going to go lock your files. And that's when you get into, hey, we've got good backups. Well, okay, that's fine, but do you care about your data being out here? Because you may be able to restore your environment, but we're just going to go publish all of your customer lists and all of your tax records and all of your, HR files and all of your source code out on the internet for somebody else to buy. So that's a bad day, because how do you prevent that? And then if that doesn't work, right? Let's say maybe they didn't take anything sensitive or they took something old or, whatever the case is, you decide not to pay. Then they start to launch these denial of service attacks. And what a denial of service attack is, or in this case, a distributed denial of service attack, is when a company or when an attacker or a threat actor bombards your resources with a bunch of inbound requests that take up all of your computing resources. So a classic example would be you have a web server. Web server is designed to take 1,000 connections at one time, but the attacker sends 1,100 requests. Well, it's going to exhaust all of your available connections for users. And then when a real customer tries to go to your website, all of the connections are, taken up, and your customer gets an error message that they can't connect. And they can keep these attacks up days and days and weeks and weeks and months and months. That's where companies like Cloudflare and Akamai and all these other, big names come in to help try to mitigate some of this. But if you're a small shop, small and medium business, can't really, implement something like that, these distributed denial of service attacks can really be, impactful in a negative way. I spent New Year's Eve and New Year's Day in 2022 on site with a client, helping them navigate through exactly this. It was a long weekend and a very expensive one. So if you can learn from my mistakes, or well, more specifically from other people's mistakes, this is not a situation you want to be in. We want to try to do our best to keep ransomware and bad actors out, so that we don't have to go through this kind of thing. And so the way that we approach this, and this is some of the stuff where I think we're going to start to get into, how 7X goes about getting our arms around an environment. If somebody brought us in from the cold and said, hey, what do I do? Where do I start? I don't know. I have no idea. Well, we're gonna recommend that you do an assessment, and that assessment can be, I would recommend a holistic one, right? So we could come in and pretend to be the bad guy and do the penetration test and hack you, 6 ways till Sunday, but that's not going to give you the best view of your environment. The best view of your environment comes from a holistic assessment, right? Doing, looking at the firewall rules, looking at the security configuration on the servers, looking at the antivirus, looking at the endpoint detection, looking at all of the email filtering rules in kind of a cooperative and holistic assessment versus doing the penetration test. A penetration test is designed to find a path to a target, and it may find one, even though there may be 10 others. It's only focused on getting to a goal. So if you do what we would consider more like a vulnerability assessment, you're seeing everything. You're seeing the processes, you're seeing the policies, you're seeing the configurations. You're getting this whole view of the environment. So if you've done nothing, start with one of those holistic assessments rather than one of the penetration tests. And when you get to the comfort level with the environment that you think you fixed all this stuff and you're ready to stand up to an attack, that's when you can flip gears and do a penetration test. One of the things that I like to do, and the way that I look at this, right, is I look at everything like a math problem. If I can get the organization into a math problem, everything becomes very, very simple, right? It's easy to make decisions. It's easy to make priorities. It's easy to align budgets. It's all very simple, because math is discrete. It's finite, right? I either can afford this, I can't afford this. I need to do this, I don't need to do this. If I told you that there was a 90% chance that it was going to rain today, you'd probably take your umbrella with you on your travels, right? Or work from home. So if we do these assessments and we get to 90% probabilities on this, that, or the other, you can make pretty informed decisions about what you need to do and where you need to kind of point the limited resources that you have. So almost every organization has this, right? There's no unlimited budget for security. So you got to make the best of what you have, and understanding where to allocate that to get the most bang for your buck is where those assessments come in. So little bit of background on, and I know we're getting pretty close. I do want to give you guys a little bit of time for Q&A. But 7X, we come in, we say, hey, listen, if you want any kind of background on us, we're 2 years old. We've done, I think on my team, I've got about 80 years worth of combined experience. We've done 350 projects, and we are a fairly new company at 2 years old, but we've got a lot of that old experience. We've done 76 projects under our current label. If you want any more information about the organization, if you want my contact information, my cell phone number, my email address, feel free to grab that QR code and download my contact information. It's all there, and I promise that that's not a malicious QR code. So, but that's it. Thank you guys so much. I kind of sped up a little bit at the end there because I blame Mike for talking too much. But if you guys have any questions, happy to try to field them now.
Hey, thank you so much, Matt. By all means, anybody who wants to have a question, just take yourself off mute and ask them now. I mean, it's you've given us a lot to think about, a lot to talk to our clients about, and a lot to implement ourselves. And by all means, some ways that you and your company can help both ourselves and our clients.
Yeah, perfect.
Matt, very informative. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, JD.
This is Megan. Thanks so much. I got excited listening to this, and I'll tell you,
scared.
so many, for, I guess, thinking about there are concrete things that you could do and system things you do, but the experience is that so much of it is not that stuff. It's and there's so much we can do that doesn't cost money, including normalizing following the rules, normalizing asking questions or picking up the phone and saying, hey, did you really send me this thing? Thanking people for checking, especially like at our level, it might be easier, but somebody maybe that doesn't get to supervise other people yet, they don't want to make mistakes, or hold things up. So to kind of normalize and thank people for taking the extra precautious step, kind of, because I think a lot of it comes, in the culture, of what we can do.
Well, I think both Mike and Matt both kind of mentioned to it the human element is really the weak point. And I just find, personally, I just find so many times just being in a rush, and you get the phishing email, and like I don't know how many times I almost click on it, let me go check the web link and see where this came from. They can just send them all the time. So
yep,
it's really just personally having a kind of a consciousness of what's out there, and just always double checking before you kind of click or call or answer somebody on the phone.
Yeah, listen, and I don't want to give anybody any misconceptions. We are all vulnerable to this. 3 weeks ago, I logged into Facebook for the first time in a millennium, and my uncle sent me a message that said, hey, I saw this picture of you, and it was a link, and clicked on it, right? Thankfully, I run on a Mac, and the virus that it was trying to load only worked on Windows. So I got lucky, but nobody's immune from that, right? Like even
Right.
I, in a hurry, can click on things and just have to go back and do stuff. So, and we tore that virus apart, by the way. We downloaded it, we played with it. We had a lot of fun with it, and it didn't do anything super bad. It just kind of trolled your contacts and harvested your Facebook information. But nobody's immune, right? We all get in a hurry. We all get complacent. It's that stop sign down the street from your house that you stopped at when you first moved in, and now you kind of Cali roll, and sometimes you just don't even stop at all. It's, we just get into these cycles, and it happens.
Matt's been pretty kind to me. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is Tim. I'd like to thank you for a great presentation. I think you covered it well. One thing I want to point out is there's no line between the public sector and private sector anymore, because the public sector depends so much on the private sector that it's all one big mess right now, right? So we had a lot of the same fundamental strategies that you had. Our biggest challenge was convincing leadership that it's not an IT problem. right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a recent book out there, Cybersecurity for Business, that was put out by the Internet Security Alliance. It came out a couple months ago, and it's written at a high level executive level and a board room level. And in it, it's got endnotes in each chapter that has all the reference documents that they're referring to, so that you can go as deep as you want. But basically, it's written at the level that you can actually sell the need for the fact that this is not just an IT problem anymore, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we do a lot of when we have that issue where we're hitting the glass ceiling, as it were, we do tabletop exercises for those customers, and we drag the executives in and we tell the executive point blank, you've got ransomware and you can't do what you need to do and the business isn't functioning. What do you do? And put it on them and say, oh God, I don't want to be in this position ever again. Right. But yeah, it's got to be top down. It has to be.
Yeah. And it's everywhere.
Well, I think that's exactly right, Tim, that, you know, it's become pervasive. It's got to be part of, from a private business standpoint, part of your business plan. And from, I'm going to call it a public-private partnership role. It's like you said, it's all touching everywhere. You need to make sure that you are being, you know, aware. Piggyback on two quick comments. One, on that tabletop kind of an exercise. That's a great way for you all to approach your customers. Say, have you ever done this? Have you ever sat down and said, what happens if we get ransomware going? And you can just play the scenario out with, you know, common sense stuff that goes on. But you know, if your customers get that understanding, going through, you know, a scenario that we know how to devise, is a great way to pin down your exposures, you know, and will lead you to how you can build your plan more effectively. So if you don't want to go all the way to a pen test or all the way to a threat and vulnerability assessment, you could start with a tabletop, which is a lower risk approach, you know, in terms of doing it. If you don't have a good program, though, that tabletop will create, you know, a scary nightmare. I mean, you look up and go, holy crap, you know, maybe we should just close the doors.
Yeah,
but,
seen that happen.
Yeah, you know, kind of a thing. But Matt made another point about everybody being vulnerable. I've worked with these guys for 8 years now in 2 different companies. My second time around, what do you think they're doing? They're smacking the sales guy around, you know, reminding me of, you know, some of my potential bad habits in terms of where it's at. I'm much more away walking in this time around, because the first time around, they just shut my computer down if I did anything stupid. Now they're being kinder. I think it's because I'm a little older, but in all seriousness, you know, it is there for all of us. You know, that awareness level is a very, very important thing to have. You know, from everybody, be aware of it.
And I can hit the mute button on Mike. So if I ever need to, that's a good thing too.
All right.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate the time. Certainly, if anybody has anything they want to follow up on, a conversation, I'm always happy to chat. You know, if you really just have hours and hours of time to kill and don't and want to go nowhere with a conversation, by all means, talk to Mike. But I certainly appreciate. I'm honored to be a part of this and to have you guys sit there and listen to me ramble. So I do appreciate it. I've got to jump for another one, but I hope everybody has a great weekend. And if you need anything at all, by all means, we are here. So thank you.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.